Hi, I'm Tony Riddle, and this is the Nat Life Pod, a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. Big shout out to this episode's sponsor, XL Coffee. XL are renowned organic coffee producers here in the UK who have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure their coffee is mold-free and has kept its antioxidant potency. XL are waking up the world of coffee. I'm a big fan and recommend you go give them a try. Use discount code NATLifePod at checkout. Details are in the show notes. You may have heard or been inspired by the Couch to 5K movement. Well, let me introduce you to the mobility scooter to marathoner and beyond. My next guest, Samphire Hayes, shares a story of true healing and transformation. Sam talks to her healing journey from being a couch-bound chronic pain sufferer on pain meds to a thriving marathoning natural lifestyle coach, and how healing herself through a holistic approach which combines natural movement, natural nutrition, mindfulness, nature immersion, and a whole heap of self-love and compassion now gets to help empower others on their healing journey too. If you're looking for inspiration, then this conversation with Sam will no doubt tick that box. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did. Samphire Hayes, behind the mic. This is your first time behind a mic.
It is, yes.
Yay! We're popping chairs, Sam's cherry. Amazing. How you feeling today?
Yeah, good.
Yeah, we did a bit of breath. We down-regulated. That feels nice, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
How's it feel to be with the cameras here?
A bit.
Yeah, it does, right? I remember my first pod, it felt very much like that. But it is just a chat, right? It's just a conversation. And we know each other well.
Yes.
Been on a bit of a journey. You've been on some journey. It's really inspiring. You know, I have this, we're awe-inspiring beings and we have everything inside of ourselves to be the change. And you have definitely walked that path. So it's great to have you on here to share your story.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you for accepting the call. Let's start with your name change, you know, because
Okay.
Samphire Hayes, when we first met,
Was not my name.
it was not your name.
No.
So what brought around the change? What brought that change in for you?
So I am getting divorced.
Yeah.
And I wanted to change my surname because I didn't feel that I was still Morris. And didn't want to go back to my maiden name because that felt like stepping back to someone that I'm not anymore. And so, yeah, just searched for a name and landed on Hayes, which has some meaning behind it for me. And Samphire was a nickname that was given to me by somebody in the Nat Life tribe, very good friend of mine. And it came.
You got the Nat Life tribe plug-in so early.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Well,
Sam's a member of the Nat Life tribe.
I am. Yes. So yeah, and it came from, she was like, Sam, you're on fire at the minute. You're Samphire. And then she's like, right, I'm going to call you Samphire from now on. So then she did, and I quite liked it. And then I kind of took it on board as a nickname, and then quite like people calling me Samphire. So I thought, well, I'm going to change my surname anyway. Going to do the deed poll thing. So why not change the first name as well? And it's, yeah, quite empowering to choose your own name. And I feel like I'm kind of emerging from a lot of the stuff and the work that I've been doing. And it's like I'm emerging as this new identity while still, past Sam's coming along too. Not detaching myself from that, but just embracing this new human that I am.
Yeah, there can be an element of grief involved with like the letting go of that person. Right?
Yeah, and I've done a lot of grief work around that. And I recently did a sort of rebirthing process in a pool, which kind of felt like a sort of baptism almost to my new identity, but also a grieving and a letting go of. It was quite symbolic for me to kind of bring that in, that I was letting go of the past version and then embracing the new one and baptized into Samphire Hayes. So yeah, it was quite a good process.
I can see that really taking off. Like birthing pools suddenly exploded. We have rebirthing pools. We were discussing this earlier in the sauna, right? And we were talking about Hackney Baths, right? And I was speaking to 9 years ago. I think I held a men's retreat, and it was at 42 acres. and they have this. It's called the Frida Suite. It's the suite that's in the main house and has this huge bathroom. And the kids loved it when we lived there because they could just finally get a bath upstairs in the house, which they loved that room. Anyway, it had a big roll top bath in the middle of the room. And I held a men's retreat, so we're all sitting around this big tub, and one would get in, and we'd be banging drums and beating on the floor and helping, guiding that person get through that process of 2 or 3 minutes in the cold. But we were unpacking, could you imagine like this conversation years back, right? You're going to get into a bath water that 12 people before you have just got into. And it's amazing where things are going and what we're shifting and the breakthroughs we're having, right?
Yeah.
Through these practices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The water's been a big medicine for me, the cold and the warm. But yeah, specifically the cold water. Because I started doing that a long time ago, actually. I just heard that it was good for sore muscles. And so I just was drawn to it. And I would go to my local gym where they had a cold plunge, and I'd sit in it for 4 minutes. I don't know, I found out online somewhere, someone told me 4 minutes at the time. And I would sit there for 4 minutes and people would look at me like, what's she doing? She's there for 4 minutes. But I was in so much pain in my body that the contrast of the sort of impact of the water, I think it was a relief for me.
Yeah.
And then more recently, in the last couple of years, engaging as a conscious practice with the breath and using it for not just pain physical, but mental practice as well.
Yeah, and everything outside the tub, not just in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was when you first came to the house in Somerset and you came for a 1-day immersion, and I was quite surprised at how you just were in that cold. We were in there, what was it, like 10 minutes or
It was
something?
22 minutes.
22 minutes. There we go. It's like an incredible length of time.
I was waiting for you to tell me to get out, and you were waiting for
You were
me to
just,
finish.
but
And
you
to
were
stay
just
on.
so comfortable in there,
I was, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the rebirthing pool part of the conversation doesn't do the whole rebirthing justice. That makes sense. It's kind of almost feels like you've put all this cake mixtures together. You spend hours preparing the mixture. You spend hours watching it rise in the oven, and then the person that lights the candle at the end of it gets that's it, right? Or blowing out the candle, and we forget the huge process that we go through, right? So, there's a journey there. I spoke to this because I share your story on the coaching certs about change and how through simple practices again, well, really just getting you, I guess going back to getting your needs met, we can start to heal, right? And there is a process through that. Of course, there has to be the mind that wants to enter that to begin with, but through simple practices, we can start to heal, right? And I express it as mobility scooter to marathon, because that's a huge journey. And then if we then go from marathon to then rebirthing pool, that seems like it's another journey. It's like the physical stuff, boom. That then enables you to go right, next layer, next layer, next layer.
Yeah. Well,
Can we go into the mobility scooter and what that journey was like for you, and what you were going through at that time, what you were processing? Yeah. You feel like sharing that?
Yeah. So I was a reasonably fit person, wasn't particularly healthy, but mobile. And then started having problems in my first pregnancy with my pelvis, and then they didn't go away. I had a lot of trauma. My father died, and there was a whole chaos that happened around that, and his mental health declined before he died. And so I think that kind of merged itself with what was physically going on in my body, and then the pain never left. And then it got worse with my second pregnancy. I was pretty much bedbound by the end of my second pregnancy, really struggling to walk. And again, the doctor said, "Oh, we'll kind of go away." Never did. And then looking back now, I realized there was this fear of moving, because it felt like if I moved, I was in more pain. So then I just became very immobile and didn't really go out. Sometimes I was having to walk with crutches. And it was the pain was variable. So some days I would always be in pain, but some days would be less, and I'd kind of get some stuff done and I'd manage things. And then other times I would barely be able to walk to the bathroom, so it was really unpredictable as well, which was really hard to deal with, and probably was influenced by stress. Um, Probably more by stress than by movement. But at the
Well, quite
time,
stressful even to transition between those both, because there's
yeah,
moments when I'm not in pain, maybe this is happening, and then within a very short window of time, you're back in the cave again.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, it would
the
happen.
stress of just those two worlds, right, colliding.
Yeah, I could be walking down the street, gone out to do some shopping, and then all of a sudden I couldn't walk,
Yeah,
and I wouldn't have my crutches with me, and I'd just have to kind of stand there. And at the time, didn't have any, like now, if something like that were to happen, I would do some down regulation breath, I'd move, or I didn't have any
you have the
tools
modalities
to
now to.
use. Yeah, I just was like, oh, I can't walk now, and then I would get very upset and embarrassed. Um, and often the people that I was with, if I was with someone, they might get frustrated because they'd be like, "Well, you were fine a second ago, and like now you can't walk." And yeah, it was
They can't relate.
they couldn't relate, and it is hard. And I used to wish that I like had some kind of color, like I'd go purple when I was in like a higher level of pain, so people would understand. Because from the outside, I didn't look disabled, but I was at times,
Mm.
and there was no at the time, it didn't seem. I'm sure if I were to track it back, there probably would be some kind of correlation I could look at and see what was influencing it. But at the time, it seemed completely random, and like I had no control over it.
But also, you're in a real survival state, aren't you?
Yeah,
To be able to even zoom out and look at that.
yeah. And it was, yeah. So it was 2017 was really when it got bad because I herniated my disc, which was probably from a lack of movement. um, and then I spent pretty much 8 months on the sofa. Left the house to drop the kids at school, come back on the sofa till pick-up time, back on the sofa.
Yeah, and I think that's an important part to voice again, right? Is you're also the full-time mum in this position, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, very young kids. And, didn't talk to anyone, so, like, on the school run, I would have my eyes down, so I wouldn't make eye contact with anybody because then I'd have to talk to them, and then I'd spend longer on my feet, so I was literally just wanted to get them in. I'd park in the disabled bay at the school, so it was the closest, and then, walk in, eyes down, and then picking up kids who were, like, jumping all over you, and I really, for a long period of time, had a sensitivity to touch. I found touch really, really difficult, and, like, hugging my kids.
There's a resistance there.
Because it was painful,
Yeah.
and I was, really, really stressed because, well, I had PTSD as well. So, you know, both those things gave me, and I was sensitive to touch and sound. Once I figured that out, that was really helpful. I wasn't aware. I was just like, ah, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
Um,
Alert.
and like if I was in a high level of pain and the radio was on and the kids are trying to touch me, and and then all of a sudden I'm like exploding, and I was a not very nice person at times, losing my temper with people around me. Um, and
Well,
yeah,
different scale of Sam on fire.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sam's on fire.
But
Yeah,
it would
she's on
be,
fire right now.
there'd be like a wrath that would come
Mm.
out, and I would just, you know, I don't consider myself to be an angry person, but that was what was coming out because I didn't know, switch the sound off, take a moment, take some breaths. I didn't have any of those coping, just was completely unaware of how to manage it. And also I was very stuck in, this is happening to me, this is so unfair, no one else has got this, why have I got this, no one understands what it's like to have this. um, and the doctors were very unhelpful. Although I was in a process where I was wanting the drugs. I was wanting someone to fix me. I was going to the doctors and saying, "Well, this drug doesn't work, and this drug," and they got increasingly higher and higher and higher. So I had anti-seizure medications for pain. I had antidepressants for pain. I was on morphine at one point, um, benzodiazepines, like just threw everything at me, and all at the same time. And then I was also drinking heavily as well. So it was like I'm having opioids, benzodiazepines, alcohol as a cocktail, and I'm trying to look after my kids. It,
Yeah.
it was really, really unhealthy,
Yeah.
and a lot of real negativity from the doctors. So I rang my doctor once and said, I'm drinking loads because the medicines aren't working and I really don't want to. Can you help me? And he said, you're just making excuses so you can drink. You're going to be in pain for the rest of your life, Sam. So you just need to cope with that.
Wow, what a
He
support
actually,
system.
that's exactly the words he said to me.
And here's more meds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
But
I felt very stuck.
yeah.
And yeah, and then the mobility scooter came in because I couldn't really go out with the children. So my ex-husband was taking them on, like, they'd go out to the farm, or, they'd go on a day out with the kids, and he was taking them without me because I couldn't walk very far, and or didn't feel like, I was scared to walk. Um, so potentially there was more ability than I thought back then, but I just, sometimes I couldn't walk. Um, and
Well, there's a fear there, isn't there, of being then thrust back into that level of pain,
yeah,
back
well,
on the couch,
sometimes if
back on
I,
the meds, back on the booze, and the
yeah,
cycle continues,
sometimes
right?
if I did kind of push myself and go, okay, well, we're going to go to Sainsbury's or whatever, um, then I would see a correlation. The next day I'd be in agony, and so then I'd be like, oh well, that's because I went. And I don't actually know, is it because I went and moved? Possibly, but would that have happened anyway? Because it doesn't seem to be a pattern. So it was real trapped in that fear cycle. And we got the mobility scooter. um it was the same. I'd been told by the doctors, this is you. I was given a fibromyalgia diagnosis and told that's it. Um, and I thought my journey at that point was to accept that I was disabled. So I got a blue badge, got the mobility scooter so I could go out with the kids. And in reality, I didn't use it that much because I was so embarrassed to be in a mobility scooter at a young age, and people would look at me. And
So yeah, let's bring age into this. How old were you then?
so this is the whole of my 30s,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah. Um, and yeah, and there was a real embarrassment. And even my crutches, so I would keep them in the car and I would only use them if I absolutely had to. So I just walk slowly and kind of struggle, because people ask and they go, "Oh, what have you done to yourself?"
Mm-hmm.
And it's like,
Curiosity there.
then I don't really want to sit and explain that actually this is a chronic condition, and kind of go into all of that. So I would avoid using the things that at the time I thought were my things to help me. Um, so the the few coping mechanisms I did have, I didn't even want to use because they felt embarrassing. Um, and I was torn between, oh, I need to accept this disabled label that
The
I've been
narrative.
given,
Yeah.
but I don't want to be disabled, and I don't. It's embarrassing to be disabled. It's like I don't want to have this. I want to be fit and be able to be a good mother to my kids and go and dance, and I want to do that. I don't want to. So it was a real struggle.
Mm.
And yeah, and really, really stuck in that victim, until, because people ask me, they're like, "What was the turning
Yeah.
point for
What
you?"
is that turning point? What's
And I'm
the
like,
ignition
I
of
don't
that?
think there was one. I think it was a gradual drip. Um, and part of it was training as a counselor,
Yeah.
and I would have to write weekly journals that then my tutor would read, sort of processing stuff that was coming up, and every single one started with, "I'm in this level of pain this week," or and then I realized, oh, I'm my whole identity is my pain.
But again, yeah, but then you can say, well, what sparked the need to become a counsellor therapist? What kind of came
So
in?
that was because I had to leave my old job,
Yeah.
because that was too physical. So physically, I couldn't do it anymore. I had done a psychology degree and
Yeah.
had always been interested in counselling. I'd had my own counselling after my father died.
Yeah.
And so there was a spark to, okay, well, I'll retrain as a therapist. Um, yeah, and then that process, I I realized that I identified with my pain, and I also started to just unpack a whole load of stuff. I started to love myself,
Mm.
actually. I started to be like, actually, yeah, because I hated myself. I hated my body. I hated that I was angry and screaming at everybody all the time. And, and I started to understand that, Sam, and why that was happening. And then,
So more compassion drops in at that
yeah,
stage. Yeah.
compassion and some kind of self-love and self-worth was coming
Mm.
in. And then, okay, so probably the biggest thing was, I read The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
And I saw, I don't even know how many doctors. I had a pain psychologist. I had all sorts of people. Not one person said to me, oh, you have trauma and chronic pain. Those two things are linked.
Yeah.
No one did. And I read this book and I just went, this is my life.
Oh my God.
What?
Yeah, in that moment.
Really? And so then I was like, okay. And the seed was then planted, and then I started to kind of look at the neuroscience around pain, and really starting to understand, and also look at the fear part, that was actually driving a lot of, and so really working on releasing the fear. And I started to adopt this attitude of, okay, what can I achieve today with the pain level I'm in right now? I'm going to worry about tomorrow. What's going on with my body now? I
Yeah.
actually started to check in with my body
In the
as
moment.
well. Whereas before I just didn't want to go into my body because it was so painful. So it was just like try and ignore what it's telling me. And I think, reading that book, I finally understood that my body wasn't broken. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's trying to keep me safe. It's just, doing it in a way that is very inconvenient and very painful. But actually, I was there. My body's broken. It's doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
And here's the meds and everything else to dumb down the signal of, or the approach that the body's trying to take.
So really stepping in and listening to my body and going, okay, this is the pain I'm in right now. So what can I do? Can I, look at the tasks that I needed to do with getting the kids ready or making dinner or, whatever it was. Can I do that? Yeah, I can. I'll do it. And then, okay, yeah, maybe the next day I have a big flare up and I can't make dinner. Okay, I'll do. I kind of went to more being in the moment with the pain rather than this. What's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day? And so breaking that fear was really important. And I had been practicing mindfulness and doing breath work and really getting in touch with the breath, and how that can be, really helpful for down regulation. I hadn't made the correlation between being down regulated and less pain because that came later. But yeah, so that was really important to bring that in. And then I was starting to become more active. I was going out and walking with the dogs. To begin with, it was like a 20-minute walk, and then gradually was able to increase. And that was over a couple of years. I was gradually starting to get more and more and more mobile. And then,
which is a big step, if you go back to the, there's heading into Sainsbury's, and there's Sainsbury's is getting a good plug here, right? There's heading into
actually shopping Sainsbury's.
There's a heading into the supermarket.
Yeah.
Which might have changed now, right? It could be the farmer's market. Into the supermarket. And now we're unpacking, it's possibly not the walk into the supermarket, it's the fear of walking into the supermarket.
Yeah.
And the fear of what that might lead to then over the next few coming days after.
But also now understanding that because I was scared, I'm like this.
Yeah,
right?
so it's triggering your nervous system.
Walking normally. I'm
everything
not
gets
relaxed.
jacked.
So I'm walking around. My muscles were rigid all of the time. All of the time they were just, because some of the therapies that I then kind of went into were massage. Massage has been a really big part of helping me. And the massage therapist at one point was coming once a week when I was like really starting to recover, because we were like, okay, we're gonna just keep, because every time he'd like loosen everything off, and then like within 24 hours it was back rigid again. And within a couple of months of him coming once a week, or maybe about 3 months, he said to me, Sam, this might sound strange, but you've got a normal bum now. Because my glutes were just rock hard all of the time. And he was like, it's actually really released, and it's not. And it was, a combination of the massage and the down regulation practices, and really bringing my body out of this, fight.
Yeah, it's because I often speak to the physical, social, spiritual needs, right? And we need to get our needs met. But if you unpack it and you say, okay, well, walking is a need because a movement is a need. When I'm moving, so therefore there's less suffering. But actually, how am I moving? How am I walking? Am I really upregulated? how much tension. So it's not then the movement, the sleep, the food, the rest. Well, rest is in there now in that
Yeah.
conversation, because it's the rest and the air breathing is a physical need. So we could say, right, through breath and rest, you get to really calm that nervous system down.
Yeah.
And therefore the movement need can be better met,
Yeah.
you know, because it aligns more, it's in alignment, let's say, with what walking would truly be like in a natural environment where we would be down regulated unless the threat comes in, whereas you're in the threats come in, the threat's there. So how do we get back to that position of remaining calm again?
Yeah. But it was very kind of tentative,
Yeah.
protective, need to protect my body steps rather
Well,
than
the lion's there
so that it's
permanently.
not actually I'm not actually moving properly. And yeah. So so really it was the understanding my body's doing what it's supposed to do,
Yeah.
the releasing of the fear, and just becoming a bit more mobile.
When Samphire becomes Samphire.
Yeah. Well, I was offered a spinal fusion. I think that was also a turning point for me, because at the time I wanted to be offered that, because I was like that my back was just, like I say, I spent 8 months on this, like literally 8 months on the sofa, barely moving, and I stopped drinking water because getting up and down to go to the toilet was so painful. So I just wouldn't drink.
And your water needs not
Yeah,
met.
exactly. But it was so excruciating. I'd be like screaming as I was like trying to stand up and then trying to sit back down. That movement on my back, when it was just horrible. And again, they said, oh, once it's recovered, it will go, but it never did. And then sitting became really, really difficult. Um, and and then when they offered me the spinal fusion, it was almost like, oh, okay, I'm being validated for my pain. There's something physically wrong with me that maybe you can fix. And then the more I looked into what a spinal fusion was, I was like, I don't think I want to do that. And there was something in me, because I had wanted the doctor, when he offered it to me, I was like, oh, you're listening to me, I'm going to get the surgery, someone's going to fix me.
There's a finally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was like, actually, like, there can be real big complications from this. And then it was a decision, do I have it, do I not? And I thought, well, no, I don't think that's a good idea, because I don't want it to be worse than it is now, and it could be after. And the surgeon, to be fair, was quite honest about that it could actually make it worse. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do? Because I'm just, if I do nothing, then I'm stuck like this, So that was then a motivator of, okay, that doctor that said you're going to be in pain for the rest of your life, Sam, you just need to accept it. I think that getting better was a little bit of a fuck you to him. It was like a motivation of like, okay,
It's a motivator, right?
yeah. So there was a bit of like anger energy that
Yeah.
kind of went into the motivation to get better. So it's kind
Fire in your belly.
a combination of, like, there wasn't one thing. It was like a little drips of different things that came in. And I had seen Rangan Chatterjee's Doctor in the House, where he spent time with a woman who had a fibromyalgia diagnosis.
Oh, we were discussing this last night, weren't
Yeah.
we? Yeah.
So that had planted a seed. That was years and years before. And it planted a seed, but it wasn't enough I was still kind of in victim, that's not going to work for me. But I bought his book and I was kind of, okay, I'm interested. Then the book just gathered dust on the shelf for a bit. And then when I started to when I started to learn these tools and started to understand things a bit better, kind of reconnected with that stuff. And then I listened to his podcast one day, and there was a person on that podcast.
Ah, yes.
And if I had heard you on that podcast, maybe even only a year before, I would have disregarded it
It would
completely.
have been like the conversation about people getting in the same bathwater.
Yeah. I'd have just been like, and there was a bit of me listening to the podcast at the time that was like, well, that's okay for him. I mean, look at you, Tony. Like, I'm like, he's the barefoot ultra endurance athlete. It's fine for him to sit on the floor, And as I was listening to it, I was like, meh. But it landed, and that was a seed. And I couldn't stop thinking about it.
Couldn't not hear it.
I heard it, and I was a bit, and talking about sitting on the floor, and and I was just like, okay. And I mulled it over and I mulled it over, and then it was 2 weeks later, And I just went, right, okay. And I, even in the pain that I was in, I was on my own and I just got the sofa. The symbolism of getting rid of my sofa after it being my prison for 8 months, well, not just the 8 months, but there's that 8 month time that I associate with the sofa. Yeah, the symbolism of that was like, I'm going to get rid of my prison, but also let's give it a go. And I kind of wanted to be all in. So I mean, I could have just sat on the floor and still had the sofa in the room, but I was like, if the sofa's there, then I might sit on it. So I'm just going to stick it in the garage. And that was 2 years ago. And the sofa has never come back.
There you go.
And it's nuts. Okay, so I started.
It's all nuts.
Yeah, it was all nuts.
Yeah.
I started ground sitting around July time, June, July. I came and saw you in the August. In the December.
What year are we talking?
This is 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
So
2020.
July,
yeah.
Started sitting on the floor. And when I first started sitting on the floor, I could sit for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Because my back just didn't like it. So I would then lie down and then I would sit back up again when I could and I would lie down. So that was July. Came for the immersion with you in August. December, I did a marathon.
Yeah.
And I still can't believe that it's
now
that time.
You've been in the same sitting pose for like 20 minutes.
Oh, I sit all day.
You know, so what again, it's how relatable things are. And I think people really are attracted to that because there is that, he's a barefoot endurance athlete. But the moment I bring in, there's this 82-year-old dude, or there's this 77-year-old woman, or there's this or this, and then it's okay. Well, if they're doing it, then I can do that. There's have you heard of Terry Wall, like the Wall's Protocol?
Yeah.
That really was inspiring for me and for many. You know how she had MS and she's in an electric wheelchair and really crippled by it, and she has that moment of, this isn't going to beat me. I need to figure out what my cells need and study cellular biology, and then moves through, here's the supplements I can take. And then that moves then into, if I can get that from supplements, I must be able to get it through my nutrition. And then there she is, she's on stage presenting slides of when she was in this electric wheelchair. It's like phenomenal, but so powerful when you hear stories like that.
Yeah.
More so than an endurance athlete basically speaking to this, I sit on the floor and I sawed my sofa up in the year this whatever. And that can be for some like, okay, that's never gonna happen for me.
Well, it landed for me because I'd gotten to the place where I was trying to change and I was hopeful. I think before, even a year before, I was still, there wasn't that hope. There wasn't the envisioning that I would get better because I was told I wouldn't. There was a desire to get better. And, now there's part of me that still can't believe that I'm no longer in pain. And I realized I was forgetting. So I was forgetting at times, which is amazing, right? To forget that when this pain that consumed my whole life, that was my entire identity, I was forgetting that even happened. And I have this daily practice now of sitting with the absence of pain. And it's beautiful. So I'll just sit and I will, because I think we often focus on when we are in pain, and when we're not in pain, we're just like, okay, might feel quite good. But really sitting with that and just going into my body and like, I don't feel any pain and this is amazing. And yeah, it just kind of reminds me of where I came from, like my journey to here. And
yeah, I mean that 1 day immersion, like the protocols are very simple again. It's like, well, you're only in that position, you play with the edges of discomfort was the language, right?
Yeah, that was critical for me.
Taking yourself beyond that, because what tends to happen is that fear response kicks in, and our survival brain's like, I don't want to get injured, I don't want to burn too much fuel, and you're governed by that. I mean, to a level throughout the day. Yet if you are a pain sufferer, then that's amplified, right?
Well, when you're a pain sufferer, you don't want to be in any discomfort.
No, so
you want to use the things.
There's an immediate refusal almost, but there's playing with the edges. So you don't want to go to the point where you get really triggered, and then what tends to happen, the convincing kind of saboteur comes in of, told you so.
Yeah,
and then that practice is done. And I think that speaks to many different modalities and practices, that language of play with the edges of discomfort. Don't put yourself to the limit. And I think we've just gone through, we're in spring now, right? So we can all re-emerge, right? But actually, this for me is the new year.
Mm.
And in that January period when we should be hibernating, and probably, hand up, people have probably kind of hit it hard over the Christmas period because that's what we do. And yet we go New Year's Day, right, bam, and I'm straight into these practices. And the chances are that's not playing with the edge of discomfort. That's possibly going to trigger us. And then it's, again, validates the told you so.
There was a lot of told you so.
And from the people around. It's not just from ourselves, because we're going through this huge transition and change. People are familiar with that old Tony or old Sam, and they don't want to lose that, and it also means, well, perhaps I might have to change. Oh my God. And then that's triggering, isn't it?
My recovery has been very triggering for certain people around me.
Yeah.
And I've had, when I was talking about my marathon, my ex-husband said to me, do you realize how hard this is for me to see you doing a marathon after like all we went through with, because it had a huge impact on my marriage. Pain was the third person in my marriage.
Yeah.
And he couldn't.
Well, at that point, he's married to different Sams, right?
Yeah.
Because there's Sam when she's perhaps not in pain, there's Sam when she's in pain, and there's Sam when she's in chronic pain.
Yeah. And he didn't know how, who knows how to cope with supporting a partner in chronic pain. It's really, really difficult. And and I think it was really hard for him to then see me start to get well after we'd separated, because he'd only got to have bad Sam, in pain Sam, and now I'm emerging as this vibrant, I say I'm not
marathoner.
I know I'm not just well, I'm thriving. Like
I know.
It's gone from illness to actually thriving,
surviving,
and feeling alive, and so it's hard. And also I think for some people, maybe if they're still stuck and then they see someone else who has gone through a transformation, it's like, well, like you say, I have to look at myself, and do I have to change? And I can't change. And I know that Sam 7 years ago, that was stuck in victim, that she would look at Sam now and say, well, good for her. She clearly doesn't have the same pain that I've got.
Well, it's back to that, he's an endurance athlete conversation, isn't it? Yeah.
And just wouldn't believe that the practices which have been so simple.
I know, and they're free.
Yeah. Sitting on the floor, and that playing with the edges of the discomfort, that was the key for me, because that was the 2 minutes, right? Okay, 2 minutes, I've had enough. If I hadn't had that kind of language, I might have tried to sit for longer, and maybe that wouldn't have been. But it was
that then leads to being detrimental again, right?
So I was sitting for 2 minutes and lying down.
Well, there's also the difference.
Wait till I'm uncomfortable.
And the different sitting positions. So each one of those, I'll just unpack that for those that aren't familiar with ground sitting, but it involves being on the floor. That's the start. And you choose different sitting positions, and there's a large number of sitting positions you will see in nature. And if you have kids, or you have witnessed kids on the ground, you will see a large number of those rest positions. They're like side sits, long sits with the legs out straight, squatting, kneeling. And each one of those, we could say, are foundational movements. So the more complex movement, let's say for Sam, for instance, going into, let's call it the supermarket. Let's move on. Let's call it the farmer's market, or the local regenerative farm to pick up some whatever. And that walking pattern is a complex movement, right? It's quite complex to balance this huge weight, the human head, above a very small base of support being the foot. Now, what enabled us to walk at some stage is, again, the foundational movements. So the baby goes through all these movement patterns on the ground, the foundational movements, to be able to figure out how to balance that huge weight. Yeah. And so they're the foundational movements of the more complex movements. One could argue your complex movements are only as good as your foundational movements, And what we do is we go, well, here's a chair, and sit down, and that chair has absolutely no overlapping kind of foundation into the complex movement. In fact, if anything, it's the saboteur of it, because it means that we're immobile in certain areas.
Yeah.
You know, so those ground sitting positions, that's what we're doing there, is we're playing with different rest positions for a period of time. And for some, it might mean being able to sit in what's called a shin box or a side sit whilst Netflix binging, rather than thinking, well, here's the couch and I'm going to get myself into a shape that would be the saboteur of me being able to walk into the next room.
Yeah. Ironically, I was using the sofa as my resting, and
But it's
actually it was
it was a real,
causing me more.
yeah.
But I think,
Well, even the mobility scooter, because it's a chair,
I know,
you know?
I know. Yeah. And yeah, I think like the sitting, for me, that's definitely for my physical transformation. I mean, I know there's loads of stuff, but if you say what's the physical practice that has influenced your body the most, it's sitting on the floor, just the sitting. But
Yeah,
then you add in getting up and down off the floor
yeah,
multiple times a day,
yeah.
and very quickly, without doing sit-ups, or my core started to feel stronger, and my arms are stronger because I'm
Loading.
getting off of the floor. And so other parts of my body. And then I remember when I came to see you at the immersion, and all the physiotherapists had said, oh, we need to work on your glutes and your core strength. And you went, oh, we need to work on your feet. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
And I was like, okay.
yeah,
And then, being barefoot. And so that, in combination with ground sitting, very soon after I started ground sitting, I also got rid of my bed and I started sleeping on the floor as well. And that made a massive difference.
yeah.
Um, so just slowly removing all of the comfort. Um, but actually, now I'm so resistant to sitting in a chair ever.
Well, then you flip the discomfort comfort. Like the
Yeah,
chair
it's
becomes
more
more
uncomfortable
discomfort,
for me to be in a
and the
chair.
ground becomes more
Yeah.
comfortable again. And then that it's not just the physical change. That's the mind again, like the mental state of us, right? We can become much clearer. Again, we talk about breath work and meditation, all these practices. Well, if your meditation practice involves you sitting and feeling stiff and awkward in that sitting practice, how deep are you going into those practices?
Yeah.
Even the same for breath, right? Or even thinking happy thoughts.
Yeah.
If the body's screaming at you.
Well, there are times I have to balance it, like in a car, I have to sit in a chair. And, if I'm in a group of people having dinner around a table, if I'm the one, I'm then balancing the social need, right? So
Yeah,
there are times, when I'll be sat in a chair because, that's the circumstances I'm in, but I'm much more comfortable on the floor. And even I went to Rongan's conference a couple of weeks ago, and 300 people all sat in their terrible, terrible conference room chairs, facing the stage. And I just got rid of my chair and I sat on the floor at the front,
there you go.
and people sort of looking at me. But,
Well, you're walking your talk.
yeah,
Ground sitting your talk.
yeah. And I'm not going to sit in a chair for 6 hours because I know that that's not going to be beneficial to
Well,
me.
again, unless it's an unavoidable sitting scenario like flying or whatever.
Yeah.
But then there's also
Well, stuff you can
understanding
do
when
in
we
that.
are in that shape that certain areas, when we stand up, aren't going to be operating as they should. So back to the feet, even like that foundation where we're going to work on your feet, and we don't really understand that so much, but the foot is a really amazing support, which then off that strong foundation we can have ankle mobility, and from that we can have knee stability, and from that we can have hip mobility, and then we can have pelvic stability and core stability. And if you think of the chair again, well, I'm going to get locked up in the hips, I'm going to get locked up in the ankle, so therefore, well, what's the use of the core stability exercise?
Yeah.
And I'm only getting stronger in the core stability exercise at doing the exercise, because the moment I go back to the chair again, it's become the saboteur of the areas that should be moving and the areas that should be stable again, right?
Yeah.
So I think as long as even if you are, so this is to any listener, like even if you are driving or flying, or you are at a conference and you're not so immersed as Sam, and you don't feel like you can be on the floor for 6 hours at a conference whilst 299 other people behind you are sitting at you and you can feel their stare on your back. It's knowing that when you get out of that chair, you need to be thinking, right, okay, can I stack all those? And I often say, hold the back of the chair and do a little simple squat where you allow your heels to come up, drop, do a little bounce, and then walk off again, right? It helps reset that
Mm.
posture.
Yeah. Mm.
So how did that feel, though? I mean, how did that feel to be able to sit there for 6 hours, you say?
About
Wow. I mean, that's a long time, right?
Well, so I went last year and did the same thing. And actually last year, because I move, so I'm not always just sat, in one position, because you move when your body needs to move, right? And so basically you get a workout for 6 hours because you're moving through the different. And actually last year, it was uncomfortable for me by the end of the day, but
Yeah.
a year on, and it was fine.
And you're there getting 6 hours of mobility and movement in.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
It was absolutely fine. And the social element of it last year was a bit kind of, oh, I'm the weird girl sat on the floor. Whereas now, I am happy to be my authentic self. My authentic self sits on the floor. And,
Yeah. Embrace
actually,
it.
if someone is going to look at me weird, like, I might encourage a conversation with them. I'll explain to you why I'm sat on the floor. I'll talk for hours about, natural living and how it's helped me. So sometimes it encourages conversation. And actually last year somebody did come and start to sit on the floor with me. So, if I embody it and I show other people and they're curious and they're like, oh, rather than feeling like I'm the weird girl on the floor, it's like I might inspire them to come and have a conversation with me.
Yeah, you don't carry the torch, you are the torch.
Mm.
Just the behavior alone, right? If you really embrace it
Yeah.
and you embody it, we're talking about embodiment again, right? To be
Yeah.
able to sit and practice for that length of time. And floor sitting is an actual practice, I think, for a large proportion of us, unless you've grown up in, again, of a culture where you just didn't have chairs and then it's just normal.
Yeah.
And this brings it back, I guess, to tribes of influence again, right? If you think to Samphire now to Samphire then, right? And how it's not just the ground sitting, it's not that, it's actually the communities now that you're immersed in that are enabling that for you to really kind of own it, right?
Being in the Nightlife Tribe community and other communities that I found myself in, and just being accepted and able to be me without judgment, and it's just encouraged me to be like, okay, well, this is me. And I mean, anyone who's going to criticize me for sitting on the floor or think I'm weird or whatever, I'm not in pain anymore. And I don't care. It's kind of, you can think that, but actually, if you want to hear my story, you'll see why. And I'm not going to try and convince you that you should sit on the floor, but it's worked for me. And you can think I'm weird, but I'm not in pain. So I'm not going to be in pain to conform to your norms. I'm going to do what's true to me and
Brilliant.
not be in pain anymore.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Whereas a few years ago, that wouldn't have been the case.
Well, we
I
can
would
become a
have felt
conformist
weird.
quite easily, can't we?
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain environment that nurtures that, which is the school environment, right? Because again, if you don't behave a certain way, then it could mean being ostracized, and then if we relate that to a survival perspective again, what that would look like within communities again, unless you conform.
Yeah.
So I guess it's then it takes courage, though, sense. So you have to kind of acknowledge that the courageous Sam for stepping outside of those norms, right? Because that's brave, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I do feel brave. Yeah.
How does that feel?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had to be. No, I've been brave, for a long time because I didn't give up, and I didn't, there were times when I was in that victim and I could have so easily stayed there.
The Nat Pod is a platform for conversation to help close the gap between wellness as an industry and wellness as a state of being. This is also what underpins our online community, the Nat Tribe. The Nat Tribe is a growing health and natural lifestyle community where we offer weekly natural movement sessions, breathwork sessions, and hold a check-in safe space for the community to share, connect, and raise a hand if help is needed. This is a great space to embody the practices that we often speak to on the Nat Pod. Full details on how to join the Nat Tribe are in the show notes. I hope to see you moving, breathing, and sharing in there real soon. of the London Marathon is. How did it feel? How was
Oh,
that?
that was very emotional.
I mean, even the training going,
I know.
let's unpack the training leading up to it, because that's quite something, right? Just
Yeah.
if you think about, I always say, same as endurance events or running big distances, if it's a race, it's not about that day. I mean, largely it's about getting even to the start line,
Mm.
getting to that start line and the process we have to go through to get there,
There was a lot of
you
process to
know?
get to that start line, and walking to the start line.
Mm,
Um, there was lots of tears and lots of, oh my God, I can't actually believe I'm about to start it, let alone like the finish line. But like just even getting to that point where I was at the start line of the London Marathon,
mm,
and I walked it in the end. I wanted to run, um, but I was getting some knee niggles and I was getting some stuff going on, and I just thought, okay, well, I'm going to ease back, and walking it is, I could barely walk to the bathroom at times in my past, so to walk it is enough. And I remember talking to you, and I was like, "How do I train for a marathon?" And you just said, "Do a marathon." I was like,
it really surprises people when I
"What?
say that. What? Yeah.
What are you talking about?" You were like, "Sam, just do the distance, and then the distance is then not a thing." And I just remember thinking you were crazy. And then it was like a couple of weeks later, and you just went, "Have you done it yet?" I was like, "Tony, what?" Like thinking,
It's quite an unorthodox way of training for a marathon, I know. But it was walk the marathon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And you were like, "Have you done it yet?" And actually, it was part of the way you were just, because I was like, you knew my history, you knew where I'd been, and you were just like, "She can walk a marathon." You were like, "Just pick a Sunday, pick 6 hours." And I'm thinking it's probably going to take me longer than 6 hours, um, but yeah, that just kind of dropped in my head. And then it was the December, so marathon was in the April, and in the December, I thought, "Oh, I'll do a half. I'll do a half marathon." And I thought I found this route that was, I thought, well, I'll do it like the same terrain as where the marathon's going to be. So I found this route that was 13 miles, went into London Bridge, and it had been snowing. So there was snow on the ground. It was freezing. It was raining. It was like
Everything.
everything
Everything it
being thrown
needed
at
to
me.
be. Yeah, yeah.
And so I was walking. I was plodding along, and I did this loop that then came back to London Bridge Station, and I was knackered and I was wet and I was, you know, but I knew that it was 13 miles from London Bridge Station back to my car. And I thought, I'll just carry on. So I did.
Mm.
So I hadn't planned to do the marathon that day. Um, I just thought, well, I'll do a half. And just something, I was like, I'm just going to see. And I thought in my head, what's the worst that's going to happen? I have to get a taxi. I'm walking home. Um, I'll just see how far I get. And and then I did, yeah, full 26.2 miles. Um,
So you've
and
done 2 marathons.
yeah, so that was my preparation for the marathon. And then I did the London Marathon. Um, and that felt, I don't know, they felt different because that was lots of people around and the hustle and bustle, and someone from the tribe, lovely
Yeah.
Leanne, came to give me a
Yeah,
big
that
hug
was
halfway.
powerful, that. I
And
love tuning
actually,
into that.
do you know what, Leanne? Oh my goodness, love Leanne so much for this, because she came, met me halfway, and then you kind of you go into the worst bit of it, which is all around Canary Wharf, and it's all the city bit. Um, And so I kind of went off into that. I had wet socks because it had been raining at the beginning. And she sent me a message saying, "You okay?" And I was like, "Can you get me some dry socks, please? My feet are rubbing." It was around mile 19, I think it was. And suddenly I see this goddess on a bike come towards me, that is Leanne, with a pair of merino wool socks that she's found in some random co-op somewhere. And she comes cycling at me. And then she cycled the rest of the way with me.
Mm.
And around mile 24, I started getting real pain in my hamstring. I was getting all sorts of like really sharp, not sure if I can do it anymore. It'd taken me so long, I'd fallen behind the back of the
Yeah.
marathon.
Yeah.
So there's road sweepers around me, and it's like mentally, then I'm like, there's no cheering crowds. It's like they're cleaning up. I haven't
This is
finished.
me now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was real. I was real in it. And Leanne was just there on this e-bike next to me, coming along with me. And then I got to the end, and there's an alternate ending. If you finish past a certain time, you don't get to go through the big fancy tunnel. You have to go to a separate bit. We couldn't find it. So I was like walking and then found some people and I said, "Where's the finish line?" They went, "It's back there." And I'm thinking, "You're kidding me." So I actually did more than a marathon
There you go. Did an
because
ultra.
I basically went and then finished the marathon, and then I'm in the middle of you know, it's like in the centre of London near Trafalgar Square, and then I've got to get home. So then I've just done a marathon, and then I'm like, couldn't get a taxi. So then I'm like walking. I was, yeah, pretty achy. And then like on the train on the way back, and then I got a taxi back. I didn't drive back, but it was like, it wasn't just the marathon. It was the standing around for 2 hours before the marathon, doing the marathon, then trying to get home after the marathon. So it was a pretty um, big day, but it was, yeah, I've got my medal at home and it's just a reminder, of how, yeah,
Well, again, what it takes to arrive at the start line.
yeah.
Because, again, it's everything that it's taken to get to the start line.
Well, just even like, I remember,
Unpack that whole story, right?
I
What you
remember
just did.
when I dropped it into the Nat Life Tribe WhatsApp and I said, I've been offered a place at the London Marathon, and you were just like, "What?" Like, just even that you've applied, like,
Yeah.
and at that point, I mean, that was November, right? So I started ground sitting in July, and
Yep.
then November had it in my head that maybe I could do a marathon already, you know? So it was so, so quick. Um, and yeah, and then I did it in the December and then again in the April. And yeah, quite symbolic really, going from, I think actually walking it for me was probably better than running it
Yeah.
because it took 9 hours and it was a real pilgrimage and I didn't take any music with me. I wanted to be in it. Um, and I was in it. There was some real pain cave moments and but yeah, it felt like a
It's a long time to be out there, right?
mhm,
Um, but again, the just the strength, like the I'd say of mind to that December to get to that 13-mile marker because you've already created that as the finish line.
mhm,
And then to go, well, actually, no, do you know what? I'm gonna go all the way back to the car and then to go and do the distance again.
yeah.
That's huge.
It was pretty massive. It did feel, yeah. And I went into, so I got back to London Bridge Station and I was wet and soggy and my hands were cold and there's a clothes shop there and I went in and I got some gloves and I got a hat and I got a jumper because I was not really very well prepared for the weather. And the woman said, "Oh, what are you doing today?" I said, "Well, I've just walked 13 miles. I think I might do another 13 miles." And she went, "Why?
Mm,
Why?" And I went, "'Cause I can.
there you go. That's amazing.
'Cause I can. 'Cause I can walk." And now, dance is my favorite medicine because I couldn't dance, couldn't move my body. And now I'm at ecstatic dance all of the time, moving and I can move my body. It's such a
I mean, does
celebration.
that take you into a point when Sam was dancing? Is that because you almost said I never, but is there a Sam that used to be able to
Yeah.
express herself like
Yeah,
that?
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I used to enjoy dance a lot.
Mm,
Um, and yeah, and then there was a period, although I never, so I have real strong memories of at certain points where I was really in the pain, like proper writhing, like just unbearable,
well, you can see as you start
tense.
to
Yeah, I'm
explain, you go into
already
the
like,
shell of
yeah.
that, right?
So like proper writhing. And I have this memory of getting down on the floor, putting on Michael Jackson, trying to move my body, and yeah, just trying to get out what was in my body. I was crying and I was just, singing and just in it. So there was something in me even back then that kind of knew to move,
Mm,
that would come out at times, um, but then would maybe get shut down by the fear. But yeah, sometimes when it really, we get to that really overwhelming point where it's almost like when it got to that point, like my body took over and was like, we need to move now. Um, but um, but yeah, now dance is a really conscious practice. Um, and I go and I'm with the freedom of being able to move my body in whatever way it wants, and I don't care who's watching, and actually nobody around me cares who's watching because they're conscious spaces that I go to.
They're also processing spaces. I look at movement, dance, expression. They're ways of processing. So if you were Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it's the first time really I read anything about that understanding of down regulation, what it meant to be that parasympathetic, sympathetic. Years ago, that book, it kind of dropped in, I think, pre-Lola days, really. Yeah, it must be about 17 years ago, right? Something like that. And the zebra, of course, why the zebra doesn't get ulcers, the lion's hunting the zebra. Now, the zebra is even going to get eaten, or the zebra gets away. And then the zebra goes through its self-regulating practices, which is tremor work, down regulates, and then it's all the systems that it shut off to fuel itself to get away, which would have been digestion, hormonal, and immune system, right? All suddenly reboot again, so the zebra can go back to, of course, you're not going to get ulcers, right?
Yeah.
And dance for us, the way I see it, and what has perhaps been cultured out, it's a remembering now. There really is a remembering. That's what I feel like the ecstatic dance is doing.
Yeah.
Not that we didn't have a remembering in the rave scene, but ultimately it meant like popping pills and taking drugs to get to that heightened state, whereas we already have that. And you can just imagine like the Europeans arriving on far distant shores and it's seeing the savages, naked, dancing, this amazing rhythm, and there's something in that. It's not just about dance. There's a processing, a tremoring that comes through it, right? The vibration of that.
Well, I find that at ecstatic dance sometimes, depending on my mood, like sometimes actually I've sat and cried. I've actually just been with the vibrations of the music, with the people and the energy around me, but actually my body hasn't felt like it wanted to move so much. And actually I've just sat and cried, and then maybe got up and then had a move, and just really tuning in and being in these spaces where that's okay, not being in a nightclub and then suddenly you're on the floor crying and people going, what's, because everyone's pissed around you. And, like the removal of alcohol from my life was just, it was adding to the inflammation. I wasn't sleeping well. I was pissed every night,
Well, you're in a permanent state of, making do. We're not even making do at that stage, right? Just
And I thought at the time it was the only thing really, despite all of these really strong medications, it felt like alcohol was really the only thing that touched my pain or made me be able to function. And then I couldn't function because I was drunk. So it was,
or then dealing with the hangovers and everything else that comes to it. We just had Andy Ramage on about the alcohol free and what that did for him, because again, we talk about meditation and breath and movement and all these getting your needs met, but he was doing all that. And then finally his secret sauce, or the secret, was to give up the sauce, for him. And it brought everything together.
Yeah. And it enables you to, rather than get drunk and go and dance, and you're not really in it, you dance and you're aware and you're conscious. And in these spaces, no one else is drunk either. Everyone's in it together.
I think it helps to unpack a little about the ecstatic dance and the process, because if you were to just hear this right now and you go, well, actually, I have social anxiety, so I use alcohol to enable me to go and have social experiences, to be able to get through the door to begin with. Then when I'm in that environment, of course, I've had a few drinks, so I continue drinking, but that enables me to lose my inhibition, so I'm then prepared to dance. So there's a process there, and there's a process within the ecstatic dance, right? It's not just you arrive, music's on, and everyone starts dancing. So that process, it'd be good for you to unpack that, what that looks like, or what that felt like for you, right?
My first experience of ecstatic dance was at the 100 Human Experience.
That's great.
Plug for you.
Plugs. We've had the Nat Life Tribe. We've had the 100 Human Experience. We've had 1 day immersions.
Yeah. Okay.
It's great.
There's Nat Life Coach.
We get to that. We get to that final one. Because you're a Nat Life coach.
I am a Nat Life coach. So the first experience was at the 100 with Chris's amazing music. that just transports me to another.
Great playlists.
Yeah, it's always really good. And yeah, I was still in a fair amount of pain then. Um, and what was really interesting was I just, because the container was set, so we had done other stuff, and actually we had come off the back of Jeff's very powerful cacao ceremony, where I had bawled my eyes out and really, and we'd done breath work, and we'd done a whole bunch of stuff. I think we'd done the ice bath maybe that day as well. So we'd done a whole lot of stuff, and we'd done it all together as a 100. So it was, all together. And so by the time we got to that point, actually, we'd done a bunch of other stuff
And you're in a
together,
real safe
kind of knew
container.
some people, and then, the setting up of the ecstatic dance, so that, the facilitator, I think it was Nina,
Yeah.
that did that, taking us through a process of what we were then going to be doing, rather than just we'll switch the music on and have a dance, right? So there was, and every ecstatic dance that I go to, everyone that Chris has done at the 100 since, there's always, some stuff going on, maybe some movement practices that kind of get brought in, or some exercises to kind of help you
Check
be in
in.
that moment and
Yeah.
ground and be ready for the dance. And then the music goes on, and then the type of music, sometimes it can be quite tribal, kind of spiritual, but with a really good beat, and the vibration just always gets me. And yeah, and then it's just kind of, yeah, even that first one where I was still in quite a lot of pain that weekend. I think I was running on the spot at one point, and I was like, jumping up and down, and I was really in my body. And I think I was aware that there was the pain there, but I was just kind of able to move and completely free of the fear.
So moving through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was so in my own, I wasn't really aware of anybody else around me, actually. I was so in my own space. I think I had my eyes closed for a large portion of it as well. And I was just so in. Um, and yeah, so it wasn't about anybody else, it was about me. And then that was, yeah, I mean, there were, that whole weekend was incredibly powerful. But I think the dance, because I hadn't been able to move, or hadn't felt able to move my body in that way for such a long time, it was just like, this is it. This is, I can do this now.
The freedom of that.
Yeah. And so now, similar to the sitting with the absence of pain, dance is a practice of I can move, I can move, I can do this. And um, I'm fortunate to have the Hackney Baths and Ecstatic Dance UK, who just they put on these amazing events twice a week in Hackney. So it's like, I can go regularly to these things, and the community there is amazing. And I can be on the floor rolling about, making weird shapes if I want to, and someone will get down and join me and do it. It's not strange, or, or I can sit and cry on the floor, or I can, whatever is coming up in that moment. And so there's that real freedom, or I can be a complete lunatic and just fling my arms around. And
It's removing all the armor, isn't it?
yeah,
So getting back to, if we unpack the needs again, there's movement in there, but there's the real need to express ourselves through an act of play, right? Very playful.
yeah,
And think of how that is suppressed, or we believe it is. So therefore we do use substances to get to those states.
yeah,
It's incredible watching it now and observing how ecstatic dance is blowing up,
yeah,
and the more people are getting inside that reality bubble,
yeah,
and the healing that can come through that.
yeah,
Because again, we're not talking movement as we see movement perhaps through a lens of exercise, where it's reps and sets and pushing and pulling and resistance machines, and involves quite a serious kind of, I have to look a certain way, I have to wear a certain kit, my PE kit as an adult, let's
yeah,
call that. Whereas through dance, you can just, if you've given, and that's the other thing, it's like permission, isn't there? It's being given the permission at ecstatic dance in a way,
yeah.
you know?
And it's great because I, at the last 100, well, at any ecstatic dance now, I'm a lunatic. I don't care. I love it. And at the last one, I did have a few people come up to me who said, it was so beautiful to see how free you were. It gave me permission to be free.
Mm.
And so that feels good now. Not only am I able to move, I'm able to move in a way that inspires others to move as well. And so that's really validating for me. And that's, like the work that I now do is showing people the stuff that worked for me, and maybe it'll work for you too. And,
Yeah.
that's, I try and embody everything that I'm teaching, everything that I teach within my coaching and my therapy is stuff that I've done that has worked for me, that hopefully will work for other people. And yeah, and I embody that and just, show people how I'm living.
Yeah, well, I think in the times of authenticity, if we don't embody a practice, I think it is felt anyway. If someone's voicing something from a place of just, because we're surrounded by information again, like latest podcasts, the amount of people I have just voicing around sleep, and it's like, how much how much are you practicing?
Mm.
And it's not embodied even. It's like, I'm going to get the next podcast, and then speaking to that as if that's the gospel. When actually, are you really embodying this work? And that leads us into Nat Life Coach, right?
It does, yeah.
Perfect. Well
There we
lined
go.
up,
See,
Sam.
I
You
did that on
did it.
purpose.
Sam's
Yeah.
on fire. And on fire as a coach, a Nat Life Coach now. You came back. I really admire you for that. We just had Kate Casanova back as well. She came back to take the level 1 again and just said, look, there was a realization after the first one. She felt like she had to really go away and embody the practices and come back again, because we speak to that on that level 1. It's like, we're surrounded by information. This is how much we're going to go away and really embody this stuff to speak to it, and not carry the torch, be the torch. There you go. That's what I was voicing earlier.
It was really powerful for me, actually, because when I came in March to the first one, I was doing pretty well.
Pretty well. So let's
well, I was about to do a marathon.
Let's talk about with the marathon's in there.
Yeah.
And then there's a tidal pool
Oh,
down here in Porthtown. So the tidal pools where we are on the north coast, they were originally the communal baths for the miners. Huge mining industry here for copper and tin. And 2/3 of the world's copper, tin came from Cornwall. And these miners of that time were using dynamite to blow out areas of the rock so that could form a pool that would be their normal bathing. So talk about discomfort, comfort where we are today. That was just that. Oh, it was a joy for them to get in that water and clamber down the rocks to get into it. But I it's part of my routine is to go to this tidal pool. And so on the coaching cert, that's what we did, right? And so if we think about the marathon, that's one thing, but actually to get down to that pool, if the tide is at mid to low or mid to high,
well, I mean,
you have to go down a rock face. You can't just clamber over a few rocks to get into it.
Yeah, and it was pretty diagonal.
It's steep.
Had to do a crab crawl forwards. That's the only way to really get down. And I remember,
which is that's the inverted crawl. That's it in context. Otherwise, we're just doing movement on the floor for movement's sake. But actually, let's put it into context. This is why you do that movement.
But that was a good moment, because I remember looking at it thinking, is he serious? We're really going down this? Okay, I trust you, Tony. And then I don't think anyone else would have got me doing that if it hadn't been you. So we did it. And I'm crawling down this thing, and literally doing a crab crawl down.
So you're facing down the rock face.
Really, really steep.
For those that aren't on video, you're facing down the rock face like a W shape. So you're looking down it, your hands are behind you and your feet are ahead of you and your legs are bent, and you walk with your opposite hands, opposite foot. Opposite hand, opposite. So it's a contralateral crawling pattern, but inverted, so you're looking up or looking down in this case.
And it was we got about halfway down and someone suddenly shouted out, "You wouldn't get your mobility scooter down here, Sam." And I just was like, fuck, I'm like halfway up a rock face. What? My life is so different. And it was really, that was quite powerful for me. But the difference from March to November was, really, I felt so much more able to, particularly with the low gate stuff and the more strenuous stuff. I felt able to do it a lot more than I did. I mean, what you had me jumping off boxes as well in March as well.
Well, balancing on
You know,
beams and jumping from one beam to another beam and landing in a deep squat.
yeah. I mean, it's
Yeah,
all.
hanging patterns, low gate crawling patterns, and yeah, it's all there. And also, we have presentations, and some of those are for a few hours,
You're
and we're
sat.
ground sitting
Yeah.
throughout that process too, right?
And I was able, and I was doing stuff in the March, but it was still a challenge. And then come November, which is only what 6 months later, something like that, the difference in me, and it was a real like bookend to at the time of like, well, this is because you say about the journey, it's been a journey to something, and then a journey to it's been a continual. You know, there's so many different. You could separate my story out into so
Well,
many
you're
different.
moving the bookend.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, that was really, really, yeah, quite significant to me to then come back and do it again and feel stronger. And I kind of, at the moment, I'm in this process of, okay, I've done all this work to get myself well, and now getting strong, and that's where the Samphire is, right? And I actually feel I did a play fight recently, which was it's a beautiful practice, and it was held very well.
Like rough housing.
Um,
Yeah.
well, this was like we had a circle, and and I'm play fighting with a guy who is probably stronger than me, but holding my own and pinning him to the ground, and realizing, actually, do you know what? Like, I'm not just well, I'm actually strong, or I'm getting
Yeah.
strong, and wanting to get stronger. Like, I've never really felt physically strong, and I'm starting to feel physically strong, um, which, that then brings in more of an element of safety. Like, I can defend myself if I need to, or, just feeling safer in my abilities to, um, yeah, to be able to, yeah, defend myself, or, um, yeah,
Well, it's a
or my family.
it's
you know.
a yeah. I speak to that, like the resilience that is needed for the ever changing experience we do call life, right?
Mm,
And again, if the life just gets more and more comfortable, everything else outside of that is more uncomfortable, right?
mm,
It's like, okay, walking to the shops, that can be uncomfortable. Um, I can stay at home and swipe a screen down and press a button.
mhm,
And where does that then get me in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? That level of comfort that comes in,
mm.
and again, look at that playing with the edges of discomfort. If you
Yeah,
call that even a bookend that you keep just edging, even chapter by chapter
yeah.
by chapter by chapter, look at the extraordinary change that can occur, and you are totally testament to all of that.
Thank you.
You should be very proud of yourself there.
I am very proud of myself. And what is the most amazing icing on the cake is that I get to go and help other people, but also my children.
Mm.
Like, they've seen a mum who was, you know, drinking on the sofa and frisbeeing an iPad at them because she couldn't cope with touching them or doing anything with them. And now I'm play fighting with them. I'm climbing trees. I'm, going out walking with them. Um, the difference between um, then and now is like night and day, completely different mother. Um, and so I get to help embody these practices around them, teach them, pass the baton down, right?
Yeah, through observation, they observe it because you are the embodiment of them, rather than just the what I I grew up with this language, right? It was do as I say, not as I do.
Same,
Yeah,
yeah.
and imagine like the lens of that, like the hypocrite of that,
Mhm.
right? And kids see through it, right? So again, if you're a parent who's on a screen and then bashing your kids for being on a screen, then well, there's just they've learned that
Yeah.
from somewhere. It's an observed behavior. I think it's very powerful. And there's also the healing, I guess, within that communication, Sam, for you, right? Going
Mhm.
from there's guilt, right, for being in that position and not having the time with the kids, or for throwing the iPad at them. And then there's the acceptance of that, which it sounds like you're at.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then the embodiment of now, look, they're observing. So they've got to witness someone going through this huge transformation, which speaks volumes.
Mhm.
You know, how relatable that is for people that might be listening, but for kids to witness that I could be at this position. We could call that rock bottom, right? And
Mhm.
rock bottom becomes the foundation of which to build ourselves from, right?
Yeah.
And they've witnessed that.
They have witnessed that.
And
And
the Samphire to Samphire moment, right?
yeah.
Moments, we could call that.
And the powerful message that I did it myself, and there's a level. It was very difficult when I was in that victim mode to have that self responsibility. I need to get myself out of this. No one's going to fix me. No pills, no surgery, you know, and none of that helped at all. I had to fix myself. And so to then be able to say to my children, well, here's a bunch of tools. So you're not stuck going, oh, I don't know what to do. Like, I know what to do. I've got these tools. And, my son uses breathwork. He reminds me sometimes. He'll come over to me if he sees me getting a little bit upregulated, and he'll go, right, let's do some breath, mummy. He's 9, right? And he'll come over to me and he reminds me. And communicating with children, allowing them to see our different emotions. If I'm feeling upregulated because something's happened in the day, because of course I do, because I'm human, because things happen,
Being able to express it.
I'll communicate to them and I'll say, there's a moment the other day where I felt a little bit triggered by something, and I just said to the children, I'm feeling a bit upregulated now, so let's dim the lights and let's sort of quieten down. My son came over to me and he said, Mummy, just remember that these feelings, they're not permanent. They will change, and all feelings are welcome.
There you go.
And I'm like, I've created this 9-year-old sage who just comes up to me with these little things. And it's like children, they do listen and they do absorb it. And then they will go on to, to replicate this.
But they carry the baton, of that
Exactly.
next leg of that
So I feel so
lap of the thing we call life, right?
yeah, I feel so joyous that I'm in this position now where, yes, there was guilt. There's not anymore, because I've spent a lot of time with past Sam recently. I took her for a walk recently. I went for a walk with past Sam.
Great, that practice.
Yeah. So I went back to the sofa at my old house where I used to sit all the time. And I went from that sofa, imagined me and past Sam holding hands, right, and walking down the street at her pace. And what was interesting was I started to get some pain in my lower back, right, which wasn't there before. And then I took her for a walk, and we went and sat on this. So it was a walk that I would do where I would walk to this bench, which would now take me 5 minutes, but at the time would take like 20 minutes to get to because I'd be going so slow. And I sat on the bench with past Sam, and I burst into tears, and I just allowed myself to feel whatever it was she was feeling and go through that process. And I sat there for about half an hour, 45 minutes, and then made the walk back, and the pain had gone from my back. And and just really tuning in to how she was feeling back then. Because like I say, sometimes I forget. And actually, if I'm going to be working with people that, past Sam, that's my target
you don't want
audience
to
to work with.
disassociate in that
Yeah,
sense.
I need to still have that level of empathy. I think sometimes we try and disconnect from our past self because it's like, well, I'm not that person anymore, so I don't want to think about that. And actually, I think if we're thinking that, then we maybe haven't done all the work that we need to do, because past Sam's part of me. And she's my biggest cheerleader. She sat there going, fuck yeah, look at you. You're going down a blimmin' rock face and you're doing marathons. She's looking at me going, what? I never thought we'd get there. So she's like the biggest reminder, my biggest cheerleader. And she's my target audience now. And so if I completely disconnect from her, I'm going to be disconnecting from the people that I want to help.
Well, she's also taking you through a process so that you can remember who you are and why you're here.
Yeah. And she did what the guilt is not there now because I understand. She did what she needed to survive at the time. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the support. I didn't know what to do. And so all of the behaviors, whether it was shouting, whether it was ignoring my kids, whether, whatever the behavior, they were survival strategies.
Symptoms.
And the only thing I could have done at the time. And I couldn't have done anything different because I didn't. I did what I did. So, so there's been a moving through the guilt, and more now. It's just, rather than looking back and wishing that I'd done differently, I couldn't have done differently, just really being joyful in the moment now that I get to live this life now.
Well, it's the, again, cliche of it didn't happen to me, it happened for me,
Mm.
right? So it's all unraveling.
There's a
If we really own that language, it's all just unraveling exactly how it is. And who's to say that within that spiral, of the way I see it as a spiral rather than a circle, is that we have moments where we're like, yeah, it's amazing. And who's to say there aren't going to be other moments when we're like this?
Mhm.
But that having gone through processes, and I've gone through enough of my own shit to know that, as soon as I can get my narrative back to, oh, this is happening for me,
Yeah.
the less time I spend in the victim of that.
Yeah. And I have a huge amount of gratitude for the sort of 10 years. People think they're like, what? You're grateful that
Well,
you
you
went through all
make
that?
peace of it. That's
And
the
it's
best
like,
part of the healing.
if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't be who I am now. And who I am now, if I look at Sam before all of it, there was a whole load of stuff I was avoiding even before any of this, right? And I wasn't living authentically. I changed myself completely to be with partners or to have friendships, and I wasn't being authentic. And yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on for me before I even went through that. So having to go through this challenging, pain and the trauma and losing my dad and all the stuff that happened, some of it I wish my dad was still here, but he's not. And I can be grateful for the lessons that I've learned from processing my grief around losing my dad, from the the process of recovering from that pain. Um, and yeah, so there is a level of gratitude.
Well, it's also turning that round, because you were a great support on the Man in March for Movember.
Mm,
And it's like looking at that relationship, and it was then that, this is important to me
yeah,
also.
it's
Yeah.
important to me because, well, I see the work that the men in my circles are doing with other men.
Mhm.
And I think of my dad, and like he had a serious mental health decline. He tried to kill himself, and then he was terminally ill anyway. Um, and he didn't have that support. He didn't know where to go. I look at my brother now, who is struggling with things, and I want to be able to help him, and it's difficult. Um, and I look at the work that the men's work, and it makes me feel safe. It makes me feel safe that there are men out there that are leading this work, that are trying to help heal or help our men heal, so that that then ripples out into society,
Mm. Where it
and
becomes another template to be observed, right?
yeah,
Rather than what can be the toxic traits that are being observed. And then it's no different to the mobile phone in the hand, that's a
no.
learned behavior.
And then I think about my son, and you know he is going to have better coping strategies because I'm in these worlds where I know people, and he gets to spend time with my communities,
Mm.
and he gets to observe that we can cry and we can be angry and we can pray, we can allowed to talk about these things,
We can
you
be
know
all these things, yeah.
and we can do it in a safe environment with other people who are looking out for us, who are not in competition with us, who are really rooting for us and really, really care. And it's not what my dad's generation and what
Well,
that
the
looked like for
shaming, the
them.
ridicule, and everything else that
Well,
come
for
through
him,
expressing, right?
the space to go and do that was down the pub, right? So
Mm.
you go down the pub, you get drunk, don't actually really talk about your feelings, just kind of cover it over. And then maybe if you got a bit too pissed, then you're suddenly saying stuff, and then, oh, what have I said?
And
And
then
then
the next day, the regret of that.
exactly. And then actually, because the other men maybe in that group, they don't have the tools to cope with that because we're not supposed to talk about that. Oh, I can't believe, so actually, even if you do share stuff, the people, they don't have the tools to hold it. Whereas now, you know, in these groups and in this work, um, people that have the tools and the space to be able to contain whatever's coming
Mm.
out, um, and encouraging it and bringing it out. Um, yeah, so as a woman, it makes me feel very safe that there is this men's work going on now.
Yeah, I've mentioned this on the podcasts in the past. about the 100 Human, especially when there was a sharing, and what came in, what dropped in, was the women feeling safe because they felt that the men, and it was particularly men that have been doing the work. What that means, that meant they felt safe. So that's incredibly healing also for the men that are doing the work, or looking at entering that world and entering the work and entering the circles and sitting with other men and learning how to express themselves again, because it's only a remembering.
And we're never only
when
doing...
we come out the womb, we are nothing but a pure expression, right? We just, and then we're handed rattles and toys and a load of paraphernalia just to keep us quiet and numb us, because no one wants to hear the scream in the room or the cry. So it's, and then just a number of distractions to remove ourselves, or I guess confuse us even with what those emotions are. Because imagine you're expressing something and the parent, ill-equipped to be able to understand what the emotion is, goes, oh, here's a pacifying dummy. I mean, even the language of that, and or it could be something else, and we're meddling with needs here and the full understanding of what those expressions are. So it is only a remembering. I really believe that, and it's again seen as a natural template that men and women have sat in circles for thousands of years, right? We've just had a bit of a pause. Nice to know we can just remember,
Good to remember.
Good to remember. That's a good place to finish, right? It's always good to remember. Thanks, Sam. How was that?
Yeah, it's good.
We did it.
We did it.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did it. Come on, let's have a hug. Thank you, Sam. As always, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you feel drawn to do so, then please subscribe to the show, leave a review, and don't forget to share. Sharing is caring. It really helps me to help others. If you're drawn to immersing yourself in any of the Nat Life experiences, or see yourself as a Nat Life coach, head to tonyriddle.com for details of how to immerse yourself in the community. You can follow my adventures on Instagram at The Natural Lifestylist. Big shout out to Simon from We Are the Clarks for producing, filming, editing. Much love.